Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Abigail Williams. I have pursued a major in Entertainment and Cultural Enterprise Management, ESEM, and a minor in Integrated Marketing Communications, IMC, and I'm a proud scholar of the University of the West Indies. When you choose to study with us at the Institute of Caribbean Studies, ICS, I'm so happy that I chose this major because it's not just about sitting in class and taking notes and learning from a lecturer. You literally analyze everything as it relates to culture. It's a very hands-on course. You get hands-on assignments. Just recently, my year, we just planned an entire event for a final assessment. So it's very hands-on. You get field trips. The lecturers are active in the field. So you're learning things that are current and things that were done in the past. Once again, I'm Abigail Williams, proud UWI Scholar and graduate 2027 with my degree in Entertainment and Cultural Enterprise Management, ESEM, and a minor in Integrated Marketing Communications, IMC.
The Creative Frequency podcast is brought to you by the Institute of Caribbean Studies, ICS, under the umbrella of the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the University of the West Indies, MONA. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or wherever you can catch us. Thank you for joining us while we explore Jamaica's cultural and creative industries. My name is Rachel Ann Fenderson.
And I'm Radhika Myers. Together we are R Squared,
the co-host of the Creative Frequency podcast. Radhika, Miss the Creative Christian, tell me, have you ever actually done illustrations or paintings?
Yes, so funny story, Rich. I said God bless me in every area of the arts, but then so when you don't use it, you lose it. And that's what happened to me. So my most recent painting, me and my friend then we did a sip and paint picnic, and I just splattered some green paint on the canvas because I have literally lost my skills. How about you?
First of all, I didn't know you can lose skills with drawing. I thought that's something that you maintain, but that's very new to hear. Okay. So actually, yes, I've drawn illustrations of Jesus, a former partner's face, my silhouette, and my face as well. And then actually in undergrad, I took an art history class that had elements of both paintings and sketches. I drew the body of live models in the nude. And then I actually also use various materials for paintings. For example, I've actually used jet black crayones for a background, soft chalk pastels, and colored pencils for red flowers wrapped in white pearls. Now, in fashion design, because, I'm a fashion designer, I actually draw by hand croquis, which consists of the body in various poses so that I can have garments cover the actual figure. And then I'll eventually make it into, a 3D garment. And then from there, I also use mechanical pencils, Prismacolor markers for the skin. And then I also use like rainbow colored markers as well for things such as like technical packs, which is something that we utilize when we're creating flats or garments without the body. So that's what a flat is, a garment without the body. So usually I'll use a mechanical pencil and then I'll go in with an actual jet black fine point pen to like secure all the details. So that would be like the buttons, the stitchings, any of the notions, things of that sort. And so that's what we would call like technical drawings. So it's so interesting that within fashion, it's brought me back to like things that I really love to do, which are, illustrations and drawings and paintings and so on. Radhika, so tell me, has your work actually ever been featured in museums or institutions?
Laughing out loud in real time. What work? I know, but I love to go to museums. I went to the National Gallery some time ago and I saw some exhibitions. It's one of my favorite things to do, to just walk and interpret art. That much I love. So when it comes on to museum, that's pretty much any connection between me and a museum. What about you?
Actually, well, yes. Okay, so I've done exhibitions in both Paris and Queens and New York, and that was due to my master's case study, the designer Jay Jackson. He was a fashion designer who was erased from the main fashion stage, and his work was actually buried in the annals of history. So I decided to make sure to reinstate him into the fashion history first by producing my master's thesis, and second by turning that thesis into exhibitions, which was actually at the Mona Bismarck in Paris, the Queen's Public Library, and as well as the Queen's Historical Society. So, regarding the exhibitions, I would have built this exhibition from scratch, painted the walls, did all the graphics, created the postcards. I made it into like an interactive exhibition as well, which had visual and audible components. I built all the canvases as well as acrylic panels with graphics, images of Jay Jackson's life and his design work.
Rachel, what do you think it takes for a person to become a professional contemporary artist featured in major institutions around the world?
All right, so you know what? I actually think that it takes talent. I believe that it takes love. I believe that it takes discipline. And you know who else could tell us more about this? The contemporary artist, Michael Elliott. Now is actually a good time for us to take a quick commercial break.
Greetings, everyone. I am Dr. Candia Mitchell Hall, a researcher and lecturer at the Institute of Caribbean Studies at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. My life's work is to assist students and you, our listeners, in understanding how our contemporary identity is shaped by and inextricably linked to the past histories of the Caribbean through our built environment, our landscapes, buildings, monuments, and memorials. So I want to invite you to walk with me through the urban cityscapes of St. George's, Grenada, or Kingston, Jamaica, or even Bridgetown, Barbados. Or how about Kingston, St. Vincent and the Grenadines? What do you see? You might think you're just looking at old historic buildings or weathered monuments and parks. Now, depending on your imagination or the time of year you're looking through, you might sight a passing masquerade or murals on walls, or even smell the aroma of road food, street food, and think, oh, that's just island vibes. But if you were to look closer, if you open yourself up to a sensory understanding of our environment, you would realize that history and heritage are breathing all around us and staring at our faces. Read the landscape, reclaim the narrative. This is Dr. Candia Mitchell Hall for the Creative Frequency Podcast.
Listeners, you just heard from Dr. Candia Mitchell Hall. Now, let's start the interview.
Exemplar of Culture, MA in Cultural Studies Scholar and Contemporary Fine Artist, Michael Elliott. We are joined by a profound visual narrator and conceptual scenographer of the canvas, who has spent over 2 decades documenting the Caribbean social and historical pulse. Michael Elliott. A graduate of the Edna Manley College of the Visual and Performing Arts, Michael has evolved into a globally recognized figure whose photorealistic paintings serve as both windows into the past and mirrors for the present. His work is a masterclass in the use of metaphor, utilizing relatable symbols like tea and watermelon to tackle heavyweight themes of migration, politics, and the enduring legacy of slavery. from his iconic Windrush Series, which has moved from gallery walls to public murals in Kingston and the UK, to his Vanilla Country collection addressing racial injustice in the US, Michael proves that art is an essential tool for social commentary. His reach is truly international, with appearances in the National Gallery of Jamaica and a long standing partnership with the Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator in Miami. His works are held in the permanent collections of the Bank of Jamaica, the Smithsonian, and most notably, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Currently featured in the inaugural exhibition at the V&A East in London, which is a branch of the Victoria and Albert Museum, titled The Music is Black, a British Story, Michael joins us on the Creative Frequency podcast to discuss his trajectory as a UWMA Cultural Studies scholar and fine artist and how he uses creative symbolism to navigate the complexities of identity in the African diaspora. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Radhika.
And how are you feeling today?
Oh, very good.
And we're so glad to have you in studio. Let's jump right into it. Your work is renowned for its photorealistic nature, yet it isn't just about mimicry, it's about creative highlighting. You tackle heavy themes such as slavery, migration, and political corruption using acrylic on canvas. Share with me, why is photorealism your chosen language for such complex social issues?
That's a very good question. And I get that question from time to time from people. You know, going through art school, I experimented with quite a number of different ways of representing imagery on my canvas or paper. And photorealism spoke to me because I also have a background in photography. So there was an influence there where depth is concerned in the image. And I also found that photorealism also has a way of pulling the viewer towards it with the depth of field, with the texture. You know, viewers want to get closer to the imagery. But I also noted later down in my studies and after art school that photorealism can be also powerful in getting social commentary messages across because of that sort of almost tactile, or not tactile, but a sort of 2D nature of being 3D where the viewer can be in enjoying the imagery or being sucked into the environment and taking in that that message. So I enjoy the thrill of photorealism and capturing things as they are, but it goes beyond just being able to mimic something exactly as it is. And it involves a lot of layering of paint, which I love to do as well, and playing with light and shadow and depth. So these are facets that I've always been drawn to as an artist.
Awesome stuff. You touched on it a bit because you spoke about photorealism and how it promotes some sort of depth. But let's go into it a little more. Does the precision of your style help or hinder the emotional weight of themes like the African diaspora?
I find that depth is very important. Of course, it I don't have to have depth in my work to necessarily convey the message that I want. But I find that when I create depth in my work, it enables me to work with different symbolisms at different distances. So if I want to put something in the background, for example, or the midground or the foreground, and these elements are working together, it almost transports the viewer to a different place. And also, the depth is important to me within my specific work in terms of the formats that I often work with. Because sometimes I work with a sort of, it goes between still life and landscape formats where I depict objects up close, but they can have some depth to them, or it can be a sort of scene with the same objects, but it has like more distance going out to the horizon. So whether it's a body of water or land or something like that, where I can place my symbolism. So it's like the depth gives me a sort of sandbox to work with, where I can put all my ideas and sort of structure them together that connects with the viewer in a fluent way. Yeah.
I can see that connection indeed, because even now with your words, you're painting that image for me. You're bringing me on that journey, and I can definitely feel that depth that you're talking about, right? And you frequently use food as metaphor, specifically watermelon and tea, to evoke deeper ideas about race and history. Share with me, how do you decide which everyday object has the symbolic power to represent something as massive as the origins of Black existence in the United States?
That's also a very good question, and very important as well, because as I indicated before, I use symbolism in my work a lot. So when I see something in history, so whether I see something on the news, or I see a documentary, or I read content that is, whether it's current history or something that happened centuries ago, I often think to myself, as an artist, what single thing, or what two things, because it's never just one thing sometimes, what elements can I use to represent this idea that will speak volumes? So, for example, when I use a watermelon in my work, a watermelon was what African Americans back in the time of slavery and post-slavery, they used to use as a means of subsistence and commerce, for themselves. And by white society got jealous of this, and they started to turn it around and use the watermelon as tropes for the purpose of racism. So I looked at that and I said to myself, the watermelon could be a powerful symbol here. So what I started to do is to use a watermelon not just as a painting of a slice of watermelon, but also to have it represent a slave ship. So the seeds in the watermelon would be people, for example. And the piece that the Smithsonian has in their collection, which is the largest of the watermelon series, expresses that idea with the seeds as the enslaved Africans, sort of embedded in the watermelon. And the flesh of the watermelon also has this sort of very it's sweet, but it's grotesque at the same time, because it can also seem like flesh. It's very, very, very fleshy. It's red, it's rich in red, so it has that history, that bondage sort of tied in with it. That's an example of my symbolism. And of course I use a tea in the Windrush series, which is probably my most popular series to date. So I find these different elements, these objects, of sometimes mundane objects that we might overlook sometimes, and I use them to create things impactful. Of course, the mood or how I place them within the painting and what I do to them or how I light them and stuff like that. It's very important to that assists me also with conveying the message to the viewer as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. You mentioned something important just now. Your watermelon series was acquired by the Smithsonian, which is the National Museum of African and American History and Culture. What does it mean to you to have a Jamaican perspective on the United States of America's slavery housed in this institution?
It means a lot to me. I thought about this a lot when this happened. I'm not the first Jamaican that's been collected in the institution, first born Jamaican, that is. But this was made possible. This move was made possible by Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator, spearheaded by Rosie Gordon Wallace. It's a non-profit institution. They hosted an exhibition back in 2019, called Depth of Identity. And so the piece Seeds of the Last Tide, Clotilda, which was a watermelon piece, was placed in that exhibition. One of two paintings. So a representative from the Smithsonian was viewing the show, apparently, when it had opened that weekend, and that's how the dialogue just started to happen. And but coming back to the question of, I think that it's very important that even in the space of America, that an artist like me from the Caribbean can be represented there. People often view Black America as separate from the Caribbean, right? The Black Caribbean, right? At the end of the day, we come from the same place, ancestry wise. And, we went through the same similar atrocities. So when I do work on the Windrush or what happens in Jamaica, for example, there are commonalities that happen in the United States. There's a sort of eye to eye that I see with that. So while I'm honored to be in an institution like that, I'm really not surprised so much that my work really resonated to the point that an institution sort of put their feelers out to get my work in, and it just shows the sort of scope that institutions in the United States, like, museums, can have in terms of bringing Caribbean and Latin American artists into the fold, and not just artists in the United States as well.
And your art being acquired by Smithsonian is a very big deal, It's a very, very big deal, and we're glad that you're being represented in that space as a Jamaican.
Now is actually a good time for us to take a quick commercial break.
Greetings, everyone. I am Dr. Candia Mitchell Hall, a tenured lecturer of material culture and Caribbean civilization at the Institute of Caribbean Studies at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. My entire scholarship has been profoundly shaped by my formative years in Grenada, singing songs about how rich and vast and alive our cultural heritage is. You see, as past colonized peoples, we often perceive ourselves through the lens of others. And I learned very early on that history is something that we must experience. We experience it in our daily lives long before we ever study it. And this affects our identities in the present. This is Dr. Candia Mitchell Hall for the Creative Frequency Podcast.
Listeners, you just heard from Dr. Candia Mitchell Hall. Now, let's return to the interview.
You would have also mentioned another big deal, which is your Windrush Series. It has gained incredible traction, moving from intimate residencies with the Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator to public murals with Kingston Creative. Share with me, how does the energy of your message change when you move from a private gallery canvas to a public mural like A Tale of Two Cities?
That's a very good question. And murals weren't always a practice that I've done. In the past, I've sort of dabbled in it here and there, but more on a sort of private scale. What I did with Kingston Creative, with the murals, it allowed me to see what the scope of not just the public presence of my work, in terms of the public seeing the work, walking or driving by day to day, but also the scale. Because when I did A Tale of Two Cities, for example, which it's a mural that is celebrating 60 years of Jamaica and UK cooperation, and the center of it had the Windrush ship. The scale for me was something new because, I'm used to smaller canvases, so like 4 feet, maybe 5 feet. I mean, I even did one that was 8 feet one time, but I've never really gone beyond that. after doing 2 murals downtown and also being a part of Windrush Portraits, which were billboards that were put up in Jamaica, mainly Kingston and Mandeville Oche, also in Southampton in the UK, which were my pieces that were sort of blown up on the walls. And it's hard to describe because it's kind of new to me, but I feel more public than even before because you work outer road, people, they don't have the sort of barrier of a gallery or museum where you have to walk in. You have to be sort of, some places sort of formal about things, but people can be walking by or them eating them patty and them looking at it at at the work, you know. And also it's a part of a city's beautification.
That is correct.
Right? It enhances what was sort of drab or dreary before, a gray wall or a blank wall. And it makes people look at themselves as well and look at their history and reflect. They might walk past and they stop and they say, hey, this has something in it. There are these symbols that are speaking to me. It's telling a story. And, they, when they move on, they may sort of feeling that they have really thought about something, thought about themselves and their community, where things can go to really bring that conversation forward. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. And we're still on a roll of you being a big deal and the Windrush being a big deal, because the series is now featured at the V&A in East London. What do you hope the British audience takes away about the connection between the present and the specific historical migration?
I'm hoping that really the UK, because the whole Windrush saga, the history of it, right? And the reason why I created the series was because there was that Windrush scandal that was blown up in 2018. And it became a big thing in the media over the past few years. And it's still going on today, where British West Indians are being deported against their will and unlawfully, back to the islands, mostly Jamaica, because, most of the Windrush generations and descendants came from Jamaica. So while I'm painting this message, I had concluded this series, I think last year, but I feel that the message still needs to be told. And I'm glad for the fact that my work can be in exhibitions such as the V&A. The Music is Black, a British Story, because when it's in public murals in the UK as well as in exhibitions, I feel that the messaging can continue. And I do hope that one day that Britain has learned from this scandal and not to make the same mistakes that they have in the past, or try to really correct the trajectory and have better relations with Jamaica or Trinidad, Barbados, wherever it may be. Yeah.
Beautiful. I really do hope that this series gets the UK to really reflect and, see the importance of maintaining, I would say, a proper relationship with Jamaica, because a little controversial, but I love to say that UK right now is really just a big Jamaica, from our slangs and everything. The Jamaican influence is very evident there,
Yes.
especially right, even the British born people, they're using Jamaican slangs and all of that. So I really do hope that your work, it achieves what it is that you want to achieve in the UK, and that they really come to understand what it is that you're trying for them to understand.
Yes, because
Speak-
the Windrush is a powerful element of Black history there, because the show that it's placed in is celebrating Black music in Britain for 125 years. One of the most significant contributions to Black music centers around the Windrush and how migration took place. It brought musicians there as well, and a population that would develop Black music to even higher heights.
Clock
So
it.
so that is where my work there comes in that it helped to bridge that gap, because it can't be just about artifacts alone, like which musician wore this on the stage,
Right.
or a guitar that this person used to play and stuff, recording studio thing, what do you call it, mixing board or stuff like that's all interesting, but you have to have that sort of pretext to bring it all together, which is where the art comes in as well.
Beautiful. Now, we're going to move now to a whole different era, which is COVID era. While the world was isolated, you created the Vanilla Country series in response to racial injustice in the United States. Now, as a Jamaican artist living and working in Kingston, how do you navigate the responsibility of commenting on international racial politics?
That's a very deep question. And, I feel that I had been pulled into doing this series because racial injustice towards the black community in the United States has been going on for a long time. Jim Crow is still as present as it was. Thing about COVID era is that the world became a quieter place. So when the murder of George Floyd happened, there were no distractions from that. Nobody could really go out, you can't go out and watch a movie or these other things. The world was quieter. So when that happened,
Right.
there was more attention. People paid attention, not just in America, but across the world. Artists paid attention. I paid attention.
You certainly did.
And it drew me in. And because I said to myself, I'm doing work on Black history, on injustice toward Black people. So I said, why stop at Windrush? I'll do the whole story, because the history of racism is all connected, right? No matter what country it is, racism is a network. Right? It's a terror cell. The symbolism that I place behind Vanilla Country, I had to really think about. So you're probably wondering why I call it Vanilla Country. Why it is the symbolism I use in it was ice cream. Now, ice cream is something that is supposed to be sweet. It's supposed to look forward to it.
Right.
As a treat. It's supposed to make you happy. That's what America was supposed to be, based on the Constitution. Equal rights for all, opportunities, education, healthcare, the American dream, milk and honey. Then some people are elevated higher than others.
Right.
So what I wanted to do in the series is to corrupt the ice cream. So I have the cone with what's supposed to be ice cream coming out, but it's paper that is coming out of the ice cream. And the paper has this sort of crushed, like you crush up a piece of paper.
Crushed American
Right.
dream.
And that crushed paper is a constitution that is being crushed, that is being manipulated, that is denying persons their right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And I'm glad that I've also been able to not just do these pieces and have them here in Jamaica, but to share them in the United States as well, in terms of exhibition activity. Diaspora Vibe, DVCAI that I mentioned before. There was one of the pieces, I think the first piece, that was called Sunday Morning, SUNDAE, morning, MORNING. That piece was based on an incident of a sit-in that had happened in the late 50s in North Carolina, where 7 members of a black church went to an ice cream parlor and they staged a sit-in there, and they sat in the whites only section. That caused a stir, brought in the police and the media and so on, and it was a kind of catalyst that sort of spread other protests and other sit-ins across America. And so that's how Vanilla Country was coined, because the idea sort of started with the research of this ice cream parlor incident. I got to show the work in 2 exhibitions, actually. So there was Depth of Identity, and there was also The Whole World is Churning, which was in 2024. So DVCAI gave me a really good platform in terms of showing work in America, in several exhibitions from Washington, D.C., North Carolina, and also in Miami and Suriname as well. So different places. So yeah, that's what I would say in terms of Vanilla Country series. I was able to carry my message in terms of America politics, racial awareness. I'm glad I did that, and I'm glad that journey, I'm making that sort of link with racism in different areas.
Beautiful. I'm happy that you brought up the ice cream parlor incident, which sparked many protests, as you would have mentioned just now. Now, help me to get a clear understanding. Do you feel that being outside the US gives you a clearer perspective on these global protests and opinions?
It really does, because being in Jamaica and reading about these things or hearing about them or seeing things happen on TV or YouTube, it's only one layer, right? It can only bring you so far. Being on the ground in the US, or even if it's not the US, or even being in the UK and speaking to people in communities, speaking to fellow artists about their experiences, because I have friends in the States who are artists. Who come from different Caribbean countries, so like Haiti, Cuba, Trinidad, even Jamaica itself too. When they tell their stories and I see their artwork, I can then sort of tune it to what am I doing that is similar in experience to them, or what are they showing me that is different. And also, day to day sort of going around navigating America, I can see what the differences are over there to what happens in Jamaica. So perspective is very important as an artist in development. It's actually an advantage. An artist that gets to travel and show their work and share their work abroad has an advantage in terms of potential. And of course, it's what they do with that potential that will really say what happens next. So for example, when I went to the UK in 2023 and I presented at the Windrush conference and also visited the Black Heritage Association in Southampton, where I met up with some elders, in the Black community there, I felt that there was a sort of gap that I bridged in terms of my work, because there I was speaking to people who even came across on the Windrush ship in 1948.
Whoa.
I was face to face with people who went on the ship. And that to me was one of the layers that I sort of added to the series, in that it broadened my scope of understanding of what I was doing and the importance of what I was doing. To answer the question of being in the United States, for example, I feel it's very important because it bridges a gap in the understanding of what I do, and it makes what I do to come even better, because it sort of builds my library of creativity.
Awesome stuff, Michael. Beautiful stuff indeed.
Now is actually a good time for us to take a quick commercial break.
Greetings, everyone. I am Dr. Candia Mitchell Hall, a researcher and lecturer at the Institute of Caribbean Studies at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. How we are taught history, or how we are taught to experience history, dictates how we treat our environment. It affects what we preserve and whether we look at certain spaces with profound confusion or social clarity. The very meanings we hold of concrete materials and memories we inherited from the past. So when you study with us at the Institute of Caribbean Studies, you learn to read the world around you as a living archive. We don't just look at monuments as stone and buildings as mortar. We examine them as physical manifestations of our collective memory and identity. Read the landscape, reclaim the narrative. This is Dr. Candia Mitchell Hall for the Creative Frequency Podcast.
Listeners, you just heard from Dr. Candia Mitchell Hall. Now, let's return to the interview.
You know, we spoke on symbolism, we spoke on your perspective being a Jamaican, but also in the US scene. But now we want to touch on the business side of art. You have exhibited extensively for over 2 decades, from the National Gallery of Jamaica to major shows in Miami and London. You've also had a long-standing relationship with cultural incubators like the Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator. How important has cultural exchange and residency been to the financial and professional sustainability of your career?
That's a very good question. And cultural exchange, it didn't really happen for me right after art school because I graduated from Edna Manley College in 2002. I didn't really start to show my work abroad until maybe 2011. I had a bit of experience in Europe. I wasn't guided at that time because I didn't really have as much sort of, anybody to sort of usher me into that environment, and it was very, very new to me. So I started showing in Germany and Italy, but it didn't really have any sort of grounded culture there in terms of, any black culture that I could sort of assimilate, have a sort of camaraderie with. Later on down now, throughout the years, DVCAI was a real breakthrough for me from 2017 to the present, because as you asked, the whole commerce and exchange and residency, that was a turning point for me in terms of my international presence and also international clientele. Because I went on a residency with DVC in 2018 in Miami. I was there for a month. I was given a studio to work in, free of cost. They handled the accommodations and everything like that. So I was free to really explore my ideas in the studio and just create. And what that did is I created my first 3 pieces in the Windrush Series there. And what came after that is that I just sold all 3 before I even left the residency.
That's good.
So that was the importance of exchange. And the 3 pieces that were bought, there were 3 people from the intellectual avenues, who really understood these subjects on a deep level. Going forward from that now, the shows that I've been invited to be in, the cultural exchanges, DVCI and Kingston Creative, for example, in 2023, all this activity, what it does, it brings new people into the fold. Not just where people following me is concerned in terms of online activity, but also people who have deep interest in the work, who watch the work, who like to acquire pieces, not just at the international level, but at the local level as well, because there are people locally who follow my activity and who are sort of inspired. Of course, I've inspired, other artists here as well to do even greater things, and aspire, but I feel that international exchange is very important. And to have people in your corner, that is very important. Have a community. And I don't just say it as community in Jamaica, going abroad, because the work cannot be done alone.
Amen to that.
I can paint my paintings alone, my paintbrush in my hand. But when it leaves the studio, it depends on a lot happening in the background, behind the scenes, because art is a contact sport.
Right.
The link is brought together through people. And it's important to have good people in your corner, good organizations in your corner, good sponsors, whatever the level that you're going to as an artist or whatever activity, people are important, and to maintain those relationships for them to be healthy.
Awesome. You've just painted a beautiful picture of just how important cultural exchange and residency is in art. It sort of propelled you into the global scene. So share with me, what is the hard truth about the business of being a full-time artist in Jamaica while trying to maintain that global footprint?
This has been a sort of, I guess, I don't know if tug of war is a sort of thing I should say, but when, traveling to the US or Europe, these are two different hemispheres from Jamaica. And when I see how they develop art scenes abroad, how museums do their practice, what is best practice, what are the do's and the don'ts. We have a lot of catching up in Jamaica to do. Maybe there was a time where we were catching up on certain things, but I think that we have lost a lot as a country in terms of really developing the visual arts sector and sustaining it, right? And sustaining it in a way that is healthy and that is not so tribal. We have a system where everybody works together, right? In a system that has good provenance of the artists, very honest exchanges at different levels.
Right.
So whether they're dealing with exhibitions, whether they're dealing with auctions, and just a system in place that goes right across the board from the biggest museum down to a small gallery. I feel that if we had more sustainable development, and this is not just to say, oh, is the galleries and the museum here that alone, you know, it comes from government, it comes from private sector as well, in terms of embracing that. You know, we have done it for sports before, you know,
Right.
athletics. There's no reason why we can't do it for art. So in traveling, I'm getting to see the differences between Jamaica and abroad. And I'm not saying it's perfect abroad either.
Right.
Because you do have systems that are set up that are sort of racially poised as well. This is one of the reasons why DVCAI was established, because they are an institution that represents Black and brown persons in fine art. When you have somebody who's Black and they go to a gallery and they can't find representation because, you know, the work might be great, but, you know, because of their color or what community they come from. So the director at the time, back in 1994, because the organization is 30 years old, right, this year. So the director at the time, Rosie Gordon-Wallace, she assembled the first group of artists and, you know, coined the name Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator as a platform for artists who have been underserved for many years, and found a platform for them to express that sort of voice in terms of cultural exchanges in other countries and exhibitions, and also to have what is called a Catalyst Award, which I've been a recipient of twice already.
Awesome stuff.
And I thank them for this, and it really goes a long way in terms of in funding the artists' practice in terms of material and other means to the artists. In Jamaica, we have a lot of catching up to do. And I'm hoping that one day it can, if it wasn't here before, right, sort of really gain some traction in that part. And I'm willing as an artist myself, I'm not an administrator per se, but coming through the years as an artist and what I've seen happen on the ground, I know that I have a lot to contribute in terms of wisdom and, you know, any sort of helping hand in whatever area that I can do, you know. And as I develop myself also as a student, you know, you know, I feel that I will also be able to help in this regard sometime in the future.
Thank you so much for that, Michael. I'm happy that you brought up the theme of representation and the underserved artists, because your practice is described as connecting the present as it relates to our identity. As a scholar at the Institute of Caribbean Studies, how has your academic research into cultural studies shifted the way you physically apply paint to a canvas?
It has helped me a great deal in that, you know, when I research ideas for my art, I'll read stuff, I'll watch videos, I'll see pictures. I do a fair amount of research before applying my ideas to canvas, you know, because I don't want to get my symbolisms wrong. I don't want to get my message wrong. I don't want to get my history wrong. So I make sure that what I'm doing ties in a correct way. What cultural studies helps me to do as a practicing scholar while painting is that it helps me to also dig deeper. It also reminds me that there are philosophies that have helped to explain history of what people have done,
Right.
right, and are doing. So it adds that extra layer or dimension to how do I go about, serving my practice of creating art. What are the deeper meanings behind my symbols?
Right.
What are the deeper meanings behind what I'm reading or viewing, right? So that's what I would say.
Beautiful. But you also mentioned that Jamaica is at a place where it needs to catch up as regards to the art scene and things that you see that needs fixing. And it leads me to ask, now we're in 2026 and the Caribbean creative economy, it is a continual shift. What role do you see public art playing in the economic and cultural resilience of downtown Kingston?
That's a very good question. In terms of Kingston, the economic development where visual art is concerned, right, and the public art, I feel that if we're going to have a city that sustains economic development, the city has to look the part. The city has to tell a story.
Right.
It has to entertain. The city has to speak. And how does it speak? It speaks through its artistry. It speaks through the walls, the artwork on the walls. It can speak through the architecture too. Although I find that a lot of Kingston does not have interesting architecture. I mean, downtown has some buildings, but some of those buildings are kind of run down or that needs to be spruced up.
Right.
So if we give the city a facelift, we'll find that even visitors from abroad, they will bypass the sea and the sand and they'll come to the city.
That's true.
And they will enjoy it. They'll take in the culture. Because when you go down to Water Lane, for example, the murals around the place, all those murals collectively so far, because it's an ongoing project, it's going to
Right.
spread out. It tells a story of Jamaica's history, our culture, and what we have to be proud of as a culture. So whether it's our food or music, icons in music, sport, whatever it is, you could just walk those streets and you can see or be reminded of our greatness. But I feel that the murals are a good start. It's a good start because what it will do, it will encourage beauty. It will encourage upliftment.
True.
In people, especially in the downtown area, people in underserved communities. It will make the place even more palatable, not only ourselves, but for tourism. We talk
Right.
about cruise ships coming into Kingston Harbor, we need to give them something to look at. Apart from Bob Marley Museum, spec could aid in development, and the tours that come with it too, there's a lot of commerce too with that.
And that's very true because the murals that are downtown Kingston, it sort of changes the negative connotation about, going downtown because, as Jamaicans, a lot of us, we don't like to go downtown because of how we grew up understanding that downtown is a violent place. With these murals now, people are going downtown. People are seeing downtown in a different light. So when you use that, giving the place a facelift, the murals definitely does that. And totally, it's changing that sort of negative connotation around downtown Kingston. And, Michael, listening to you here, we can definitely see that you've dedicated your life to creatively highlighting history so we can thrive for better. If you could whisper 3 words of wisdom to your high school self right before, you started your career journey, what would it be?
I would say keep persevering on what you love.
They say when you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. And
Yes.
that's true. That's
Yeah.
true. How would you actually encourage your high school self to overcome your biggest fear about the future?
I would say have that instinct on the circle of persons that you have. Keep good people in your corner and keep good relationships going.
You have mentioned the importance of community quite a few times. So, guys, if you don't take anything else from this, remember that community is very important. Speaking of community, what high school did you attend?
I attended Woolmer's Boys School. Yeah.
Creme de la creme, Wilma's Boys School. Oh my God. Wilma's is a very good institution and has a rich historical background. So I would say that you were a perfect fit for there. And see, now we're speaking to our students who are listening to this podcast. What advice would you tell a pre-collegiate student who would like to get into this industry, get into the art world?
What I would say is, and knowing from what I've been through in terms of the journey, is that it's not for the faint of heart. Depending on the heights that you want to take it, you will have disappointing days, you'll have disappointing setbacks. It hasn't always been smooth sailing for me. I've been burnt by people in the past. Not just locally, but abroad too, who at the time you think they have your best interests
Right.
at heart, and then they end up not, like I was supposed to have an exhibition one time in Germany. But the person who I just couldn't trust the person that who wanted to have the exhibition at his gallery. So I ended up pulling the plug.
Right.
And these are the things that, yes, while they are unfortunate happenings, that they shape you as an artist, they will make you more aware of the pitfalls and the snakes in the grass and the ananses out there that will want to put stumbling blocks in your path as an artist.
Right.
But I have learned from that, and I've learned how to avoid these pitfalls. And it's not to say that they won't happen throughout my career to come. It's a learning experience because it's a hard industry. It ebbs and flows, even for the best of us.
Beautiful, beautiful words, Michael. And we're now at the segment called Tech Time for Chat. So in this segment, our guests will tell us about their favorite Jamaican or Caribbean proverb or cultural reference. Michael, share with me, what is your favorite proverb?
I was never really exposed to proverbs like that, like sayings. There was a saying I said as a child, though. I was walking with my father on a beach, down in the south coast. In Treasure Beach. It wasn't exactly Treasure Beach, but it's somewhere along the south coast, Jamaica. I remember we were walking and we came up to a spot where there was some honeycomb rock that was coming out of the sea. And it was coming up along the beach, a long strip of it. And my dad said to me, Flynn, who I'm affectionately called by my family, we have to go around this because the honeycomb rock will juke up your foot because it's sharp rock, and we're barefoot.
Yeah.
It will juke up your foot. So he tries to pull me, and I says no. I said to him, no. I said, Jesus will smoothen out the stones for me. And I climb up on the rock. I'm going to walk right across it and go to the other side where the sand is. Right? That just kept coming back to me. And, every time I think about that day, or when my father reminds me of that or tells other people about it, it reminds me of the obstacles that you could have in life, even outside of the art world,
Right.
of how sharp it can get sometime, and you need that softness to carry you through.
Right.
And I don't think I was religious really, but I just said it.
Right.
I said the statement and it carried me across. I mean, if I tried that today, maybe it would just juke up my foot. I don't know. but I did it. It was I don't know if you can say it's a proverb or it's a saying or a statement that I did. It was kind of almost pivotal to, my journey and what I do.
So listeners, you heard it here first, making history on the Creative Frequency podcast. Michael and his cultural proverbs coming from his father, honeycomb will juke up your foot, but Jesus will soften it out. Thank you so much, Michael, for being here. It was a pleasure having you in studio, and keep on doing the brilliant work that you do, You are one of the artists who will help to preserve our cultural legacy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Join us in 2 weeks while we interview and connect with Mr. Mark Golden, attorney, investment banker, music producer, and the leader of the opposition, PNP.
Creative culture. where the vibes meet the vision. Special thank you to our guest, Michael Elliott, host, Rachel Fenderson and Radhika Myers, contributor, Dr. Candia Mitchell-Hall, our sound and audio engineer, Dr. Ray Hitchens, musical selections produced and composed by Courtney Edwards, also known as Kingman, our executive producer and editor, Rachel Ann Fenderson, and our ICS director, Dr. Dave Goss. The Creative Frequency podcast is brought to you by the Institute of Caribbean Studies, ICS, under the umbrella of the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the University of the West Indies, Mona. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify or wherever you can catch us.